welcome to this Raisina Dialogue 2021 session, where we will be discussing reimagining of the Middle East in the backdrop of the new Abraham Accords. Of course, this is the inking of an accord as it comes 4 decades after the first one, which was the Israel-Arab peace deal. And remember, this is the cornerstone of this one. This agreement is economic cooperation. Economic cooperation, be it in energy, green energy, food and water security. And with this normalization of ties and, of course, the establishment of the full diplomatic relation with Israel, UAE has become the third Arab country after Egypt and Jordan. Subsequently, we have also seen Morocco, Kuwait, and Sudan to have revived ties with the Jewish state. So the questions that we wish to explore in this session of Raisina Dialogue is, can the Abraham Accords disprove the old adage that there can be only truce in Middle East, not permanent or stable peace? What roles do those countries which are outside this grouping play? And what will be the contours or dynamics as the relationship evolves? Joining me on this very important session is an eminent panel. We have Dr. Anwar Gargash. He's the diplomatic advisor to the UAE president. Yusuf Batane. He is Secretary General Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Expats, Jordan. Sanjay Bhattacharya, Secretary at the Ministry of External Affairs here in India. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Let me give you a broad idea of how the session will be happening. We'll be, for the first 30 minutes, I'll be asking questions and you can respond to those. And towards the end, I'll be giving you time for the closing comments. Let me begin with you, Dr. Gargash. Former US President Donald Trump, who played an important and key role in the inking of this historic deal, had explained the name Abraham Accord as coming together of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Since the truce is so precariously placed on religious dynamics, the question is, are these accords just about temporary truce, or are you sensing that they can lead to peace in the long term?
Thank you very much. Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here at the Raisina Dialogue, a very important forum for us in the region. I think the first thing that has to be emphasized is from the perspective of the UAE, the Abrahamic Accord is about 3 things. Number one is to address what has been really a strategic cul-de-sac in the region, a breakthrough that was necessary to break what I would say was a strategic stalemate. I think the second thing that the Abrahamic Accord does not in any way come and claim that it will resolve the Palestinian-Israeli issue, but will also, through our relations, direct relations with Israel, will be able to help and support. If you think about it, helpful countries to Palestinians, Arab countries in Jordan and Egypt, and a large part of their ability to support the Palestinians has been also because they also have relations also with Israel. That's part of the thing. So we are also hoping that this will create more bridges, and that in some ways these bridges will be able also to help what is essentially something that Palestinians and Israelis have to come together. And last but not least is about reimagining the region, Egypt in terms of economic benefits, mutual economic benefits, the strengthening the region also in terms of an anti-extremist narrative. So clearly, this sort of bridge building is very much fits in our looking at our region and saying we have to think how of this region and that's
I agree with you when you have used that phrase that this is about overcoming the psychological barrier. I was reading one of your interviews and you'd used that phrase that first it is about economic cooperation and that everything is not going to change overnight. So on the basis of this accord, what do you think you'll be able to achieve immediately in near future? What is the aim, of course, in the long run, we know, but what about the immediate future?
I think immediately there are several benefits. I think, again, we are showing, as indeed Egypt has shown before, that you can have differences and you can have issues on how you see a two-state solution and the necessity for a two-state solution. But at the same time, while you hold your guard and you hold your position on the political position, you are also able to build these bridges, build some reservoir of goodwill. This takes time. This is not something that will happen overnight. I think also immediately is unlocking, at least I'm talking about our bilateral relationship with Israel. We've really unlocked immediately an economic potential. Israel is not the largest economy. The UAE definitely is not the largest economy, but they're both very significant Eastern economies. And I think unlocking the economic and investment benefits in the bilateral has already started. I think we're also sending messages of diversity. The idea basically that we do have issues, but the Middle East is the mosaic of diversity, of diverse ethnicities, diverse religions. And, clearly when you are able to build bridges with Israel and say, I do have political differences, you're also saying that diversity is something that needs to be respected. And I think these are all very immediate steps here.
Okay, Ambassador Bataini, we have seen some rather wonderful tweeting that was done by Israeli diplomats and journalists when they traveled to UAE. Some beautiful pictures put out by them of Abu Dhabi and Dubai as well, and selfies with their UAE counterparts. It was seen as long-lost brothers meeting in a new place, perhaps. But when you look back, particularly in the context of what Jordan can achieve, and where does Jordan see itself in the context of this evolving relationship?
Thank you very much. And I would like to thank you for inviting Jordan to take part in this very important event. And I seize the opportunity to thank the Indian Ministry of External Affairs and Observer Research Foundation for organizing this very important event. And may I also welcome and greet my dear colleagues, Excellencies Dr. Gargash and Secretary Sanjay. It's a pleasure to be with you on the same panel. Well, as every part in the world is aware, the regional crises are of major impact on Jordan specifically. Of course, the Palestinian issue has been on top of the priorities and on top of the agenda of Jordan for many decades to go, and Jordan has never seized any opportunity to make this peace process lively again and to support and contribute to any effort that would again revive a genuine peace process and try to bring peace into the region. When it comes to this, of course, Jordan supports every genuine effort that aims at achieving just and comprehensive peace, and of course the urgency of launching serious and direct negotiations that address the final status issues within a comprehensive solution in the Middle East. And of course the Palestinian issue and the peace process remains the major issue to Jordan, but also to the region. and probably across the Mediterranean and elsewhere, because without a just and comprehensive peace to the Palestinian, there will never be peace in the Middle East, and tension will continue always to prevail. Within this context, Jordan has been contributing to any effort, be it regional or international, or even local or bilateral or multilateral, to support any possible contribution to revive this peace process and try to bring peace to the Middle East. Peace, of course, is a desire for all countries around the world and always has been a strategic choice for Jordan. Jordan has been impacted directly by the Palestinian issue. Of course, Jordan, unfortunately, is impacted by all crises in the region, the Syrian, the Iraqi, all other crises, terrorism, radicalization. But again, the Palestinian issue remains the mother of all issues in the Middle East. It is imperative that we make this peace even bigger and stronger when it comes to any effort that would contribute to this peace in the region.
We are seeing that cooperation and a lot of hope and optimism as far as these accords are concerned. My question is, can this really ensure lasting peace in the region? Or are you of the opinion that besides the economic cooperation, there'll be much more desirable on the other fronts?
Jordan looks positively at any effort that would really add and contribute to peace in the region. Of course, it all depends on also the Israeli side, how they view these new developments and the new accords, and whether they have a true intention also after this normalization to end occupation by moving the region towards just and comprehensive peace.
All right. Coming on this, Sanjay Bhattacharya, coming to India now, how are India's interests getting impacted with these new developments in, with the signing of Abraham Accords? Do you see opening up of new possibilities in terms of some kind of triangular cooperation?
Well, thank you for inviting us to this forum, this rather important one on a very interesting subject. And I also extend my greetings to my colleagues from the UAE and Jordan. This is a delightful moment to talk about the shifting sands. We look at this region of West Asia and the Gulf as our extended neighborhood. And so we are intimately linked with everything that happens in that part of the world. And we have been linked with this for a very long period of time. So we look at this with great interest. The way we see it, if I may just elaborate a bit, is that, of course, it's a dynamic situation and it's a bit of a flux. But there are three broad trends, of which the one that you referred to is one of those. The first trend that we see in this very significant region is one which is coming about because of a larger economic transformation and technological change. And in many ways, this is bringing about changes in that particular part of the world, and it's reacting to it. The second is the sense of rapprochement, of understanding that is now coming about, which you referred to. And I think the Abraham Accord is one of the very significant ones in that, in which we have a negotiated settlement. This is not coming out of war. It is not coming out of fear. It is coming out because you have an optimism towards the future and you have well-defined objectives. But there are other rapprochements that are coming about as well. I think the recent rapprochement within the GCC is one such. And I think we see that, in the broader region, the discussions that are currently ongoing about Iran are also very significant in this respect, because I think we all wish to see a region that is stable and peaceful. And in this context, I also wish to mention the third broad trend that is happening, and that is what the youth is bringing about. And I think, like many other parts of the world, particularly in my country and in Africa, the region of West Asia and the Gulf is one in which the youth constitutes a very large portion of their population, and therefore their aspirations, their social needs, and also what my Jordanian colleague mentioned about the tendencies towards radicalization, particularly of these communities and the youth, is something that is significant. So if you look at it in this particular context, the rapprochement that has come about, the understanding at a political level with an economic objective, which is future-oriented, is something that we have welcomed in public, as you know. For us, it is very important to note that apart from the fact that we have intimate relations with all the countries in the region, without exception, that we have always steadfastly stood with the Palestinian cause. And not only have we stood with the Palestinian cause, we have been there on the ground through development assistance, capacity building, our contributions to UNRWA. So we have always been with the Palestinian cause and their aspirations because we realize that this is an important element in this particular process. But as I was saying earlier, this particular understanding that you referred to is extremely significant because this consolidates the understandings that have been there for a long period of time with several Arab states and the state of Israel. And it also consolidates this into an official agreement. There are others in the Arab world who also understand the intricacies of this particular approach and the benefits that can come about, because today we are no longer in a zero-sum game approach. So if you want to have a dynamic approach and a win-win approach towards this, you will need solutions that are cognizant of each other's priorities and incorporates them towards something that is for common good. So in that context, we do see huge opportunities coming about. But of course, as we look into the future, India has many views on that and how we should extend our collaboration in the region.
And Ambassador Bhatani was pointing out the role of Palestinians, and then only can there be a long-lasting, sustainable peace. How do we formalize it and make it into a setup which is more institutional?
Right. So I think what is really important to note is that the Palestinians are a very important part of this particular equation. And I think there is nobody who denies that. And we've consistently advocated the cause for direct negotiations so that a settlement can be reached on the terms that both sides would be happy at the end of the negotiations. That is absolutely necessary. We have very good relations with all the states in the region, and we have always felt that negotiated diplomatic settlements are the way forward. But in the meanwhile, we must proceed on every process that we can in terms of promoting economic development, the prospects of the future, so that we can have situations that are win-win for everybody. On India's part, I must mention at this stage that we look at this also as a dynamic situation, and you would have noticed that our relations with the region, while it is traditional, has also undergone many changes. We have, I think in many ways, COVID brought about two new realities. While in the past, the focus was on energy security and our human resources in the Gulf region, the COVID situation brought about the importance of health security and food security. And I think these will be two of the driving forces as we look into how India leverages its position in this region. But there are two more that I wanted to mention. And I think these are, as we move into a digital era, and as we look at some of the countries in the Gulf region, looking at an ahead-of-the-curve technological role, India would be very pleased to play a partnership role with such economies. And in the digital era, as we move into an economy in which we are based on knowledge and based on data, in which fintech and edutech and health tech are important, in which AI and blockchains become important, India will be the partner of choice for all the partners in the Gulf. And the second part, which I think will be very important as we move into the future, is how innovation, entrepreneurship play a significant role. Because The way technology is changing, innovation will have to be more focused and oriented towards our objectives. Investments have to be driven towards each other's national development priorities. And in that, again, I think India would be very happy to play a role with our Gulf partners.
I'm going to talk about the energy changes also with Dr. Gargash. But Dr. Gargash, coming on this, the Turkish historical drama, Ertugrul, reimagined the battles of early Ottomans in overthrowing the Byzantines. It found a worldwide audience, except Saudi Arabia. And that has come as a surprise to many of us. But given the unraveling of layered relationships in the Middle East, what role do you foresee Turkey in particular will be playing going ahead, who, of course, are the new claimants of the House of Saud?
Well, again, I think my first comment is that the region post-COVID needs to think differently. The region post-COVID is going to be in a much more difficult situation because of the impact that COVID has had on people's psyche, the impact that COVID has had on economies, and COVID has had actually on various aspects of our lives. And COVID in itself also presents opportunities. So I would say that our major drive in the UAE to look at post-COVID is a period of emphasizing cooperation rather than confrontation. And I think in many, many ways, we have sent various messages to various countries in the region, messages that have been very positive, Turkey included. And the whole idea is the region cannot really expect to move forward and really lag behind other regions in the globe without a de-escalation of political tensions, greater cooperation in areas of investment, in areas of economy, and areas of new technology.
How does countries such as yours look at these developments, and particularly the growth that is happening in Indo-Pacific? And is there a possibility of a new axis in the form of an Arabian Sea community?
Well, thank you. Thank you. I hope I got it properly and correctly. Well, Jordan has, always kept a good policy, external policy, but also regional policy towards its neighbors. Our Jordanian external politics have always been not to interfere, in the internal affairs or in the sovereignty of other countries. Of course, on top of these are the neighboring countries. And pertaining to your question, well, Jordan has always, for example, kept excellent relations with the GCC countries, be it as an organization or bilaterally with each brotherly country from the GCC countries. Even recently, we have reactivated the talks and the programs with the GCC. So Jordan is not really being isolated from what's going on or new developments in the region. At the multilateral level also, Jordan has always kept a good pace, playing a good multilateral role together with the international community, with the global efforts towards achieving peace and giving peace, not only regionally, but also to internationally as much as we can. As rightly mentioned and put by the distinguished speakers, the COVID-19 pandemic has been nothing but another clear attestation that no one country can live alone and be immune to threats, be it pandemic or be it security or whatsoever. Jordan has, for example, been always a key player in confronting and fighting terrorism and radicalization because it is obvious that this terrorism is something global and international. And now, unfortunately, the latest about the COVID-19, it is now obvious and clear to each and every country in the world that no one country can be immune. That's why Jordan is participating in all efforts, regionally and internationally, to fight crises, including pandemics and including security crisis.
Okay, Mr. Bhattacharya, that question specifically on Arabian Sea community. Time to reimagine it?
Well, I think the dominant ideology that would prevail in this particular 21st century would really be the concept of the Indo-Pacific. I think that has really gathered a lot of momentum over the last decade or so, and in recent times, it has acquired new dimension. So I would rather say that that is going to be the dominant, the trend that we would see as we move ahead. And given that our location is somewhere which would enable us to act as a bridge between the West Asia Gulf region and the larger areas of the Indo-Pacific. As you are aware, I think the Indo-Pacific is really looking out towards moving further towards these regions. And I would say that that rather would be the dominant idea. And it would perhaps be one in which there would be a greater play of economic interplay, of economic integration, cooperation and collaboration in adding capacity, in adding supply chains which are reliable and dependable, and in critical times in particular. And secondly, I think there would be a strategic content to this particular relationship. So I would rather wish that we see it in that particular context.
But Mr. Bhattacharya, much of the world sees West Asia through the prism of energy security, and also that it is the host of diaspora workers. Don't you think that the times that we are living in, because the pandemic is still there, and in the post-pandemic world, that vision will be pretty outdated?
Well, you're true in that assessment that energy and human resources are perhaps today the mainstay of our relations with the West Asia Gulf region. And I think that would continue to remain extremely important. But I wish to point out at this juncture that in both these, there is a qualitative transformation that is taking place. Let's take energy security, for instance. Today, the relationship of energy security is one which is not one merely of a buyer-seller relationship, but one in which there is integration both upstream and downstream, in which we are much more invested in the investments in fields of oil and gas, in terms of collaborations, in terms of strategic reserves, refineries, projects in the hydrocarbon sector. So it's a much broader thing. Even if you look at the manpower relationship that we have, we reckon, and I think, as my colleagues have mentioned, that COVID has pointed out that we have to realize that this manpower relationship is also one that is going to change. And the two sides, for instance, with the UAE, we've already started a skill mapping exercise so that the Indian workers who go to the Emirates are not only better skilled, but are also having prior recognition of their skills and therefore would get better remuneration. So in other words, there is a certain tendency of bringing about a more regular flow through the integration, for instance, of our migration portals, and also to bring about greater stability and smartness in our migration flows. But given that, the changes that are taking place within these two main sectors, as I was saying, I think the future is going to be very different. The future is, as Dr. Gargar said, one in which health security will be very important. We already have a very large healthcare sector presence in the Gulf region in terms of doctors and nurses. We would also see perhaps greater collaboration in terms of pharmaceuticals, vaccines perhaps. And then we would probably move more in the direction of R&D so that we can have greater collaboration. But the future really will be, and I do mention again that certain countries in the Gulf region have already taken initiatives in this regard, is how we collaborate on high technology, on how do we share space-based data. Because space data would be useful not only for traditional modes like communication, but also for things like spatial urban planning, agricultural mapping, education programs. Even your healthcare systems would be run on space-based data. So that's an area of collaboration. Fourth industrial revolution, this is right in front of us. What are we going to do about AI and blockchains? You know, our collaborations today with some of the countries in the Gulf, Middle East, West Asia region are very, very deep in some of these respects. And these will become perhaps ones which will add much greater value as we look ahead to the future. So I see one in which the traditional modes will adjust so that they are smarter moves, so that they are more in line with the national development plans. But the new areas will become increasingly important as we move ahead, and these will be essentially technology, innovation, investment driven.
I'm going to begin wrapping this, and for that, I'll go straight to Dr. Gargash. Dr. Gargash, one thought that is often there is, can there be a durable peace without involving and including Iran in it? Do you see a US-Iran deal a necessary corollary, I would say, to Abraham Accords?
I mean, the simple answer is for the region to be stable and prosperous, Iran has to be included. That is really the simple answer. But again, it's an issue really of building confidence-building measures. You don't move from point A to point Z without going through several things. So I think that we need to make it very clear that the region, for the region to move forward, for the region to concentrate more on prosperity and consider prosperity equal to stability, Iran has to be included, Turkey has to be included, Israel has to be included. But again, it's a journey. I think the first thing is the realization that this is what the future holds to us. We can't afford to repeat previous decades of confrontations. But I think the journey from A to Z, as any seasoned diplomat will know, involves a lot of confidence building, a lot of bridge building, untying a lot of knots. But definitely, I think this is important.
Ambassador Bataille, your closing thoughts?
Thank you very much. It's a great opportunity, and today we took stock of what could be done even more, not only at the regional level, but when we go beyond the continents and across the seas and the oceans. We saw great opportunities when it comes to West Asia and the Middle East and the region here, seeing new opportunities of cooperation, especially after this pandemic. We learned a lot of lessons. Each country has reprioritized its goals and aims and its agenda. For example, as rightly mentioned by my two distinguished colleagues, not only regionally or globally, but also internally. For example, in Jordan, we had to revisit and to relook into our priorities. For example, as mentioned, the agricultural sector, the pharmaceutical sector, but also how to have self-sufficiency when it comes to the supply of food items and so on. It is time to think not only regionally, but also to go beyond the region, to go globally. Beyond this pandemic lesson, there is nothing more to do, but also to be cooperative, hand in hand, and to stand all together to fight all the possible pandemics and threats.
Can the peace dividend of Middle East rub on the peace process in Central Asia and Afghanistan?
I think every situation is very, very unique, and while there are lessons that one draws from each process of negotiations anywhere in the world, each situation must be dealt with on its own merits and its own processes and mechanism. As someone said, you can move from A to Z, but, the steps that you take in between are extremely important, and they will be very, very different. So I would not wish to draw parallels.
So if you were to look at the framework or institutional ideas that have developed post the Abraham Accords, what are the possibilities that have emerged?
What are the possibilities for, it's kind of...
India and West Asia.
So I would say that, the processes that we are seeing in the Gulf, West Asia region today are extremely significant. You started off by talking about the shifting sands. And I think the most important shifting sand that we see is that there is a certain sense of alignment that we see across the globe, in which we are aligning processes, in which we are looking at political negotiated settlements. We are looking at options that are economic, technological, that are future-oriented, that are people-oriented, that serve the needs of the people. And I think these are the broader principles that are far more critical and important to recognize as we see these very, very significant changes taking place. In terms of the transformation that is happening around, I think the biggest lesson that India and the region would learn from each other is that while it is true that we have a partnership over centuries and over eons in which we have had no issues between us, but we have realized that in the current time that we have become even more dependable, reliable partners, not only for the manner in which we fashion and conduct our relations for our peoples today, but also as we look to the future, because both our transformations are getting aligned. I find it very interesting that we are now invested in the national development of each other. And that is a very important realization. And I think that's what is going to shape this very important strategic partnership that India shares with this region as we move ahead.
On that note, thank you so much for joining us. Sanjay Bhattacharya, Yusuf Batane, and Dr. Anwar Gargush, thank you so much for joining us in this session of Raisina Dialogue 2021. The topic, of course, as we discussed, was shifting sand, reimagining, and the new creation of the new Middle East in many ways. Thanks so much for watching, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you.